In a world where even the smallest disagreements can lead to arguments, violence, and even death, two brothers tackle the difficult subjects. Today, we are going to talk about a recent Supreme Court decision that is known as the 303 Creative versus Ellis, I think it is.
Elenis.
Elenis. Thank you. Elenis. And this one was about the web designer that didn't want to create a website for the wedding of a gay couple, and she tried to get around the obligation to do so, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. So, what's your understanding of the facts of the case?
My understanding is it has to do with, you know, um, it's interesting how, it has to do with discrimination. So people are concerned that if a business is unwilling to provide a service to a particular person due to ideological belief systems, whatever, all sorts of different things, the way they live their lifestyles, um, that should be against the law. And and so the court ruled in favor of the baker, who I think it's not the first time that it's happened with the same baker, where one time it was he didn't want to make a cake for a gay wedding, and this time it was maybe it was the same thing. Oh no, this was a website designer, and last time it was a baker, I guess
Yeah,
is the case.
yeah. Yeah, there was I want to say 5 years ago or so, there was a baker also in Colorado, same Colorado law he I think had an issue with, being required to make a cake for a same-sex wedding, said it went against his religion and didn't want to be forced to make that cake, and it went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court says it's a creative product, and therefore you don't have to make that cake because that product constitutes free speech. This time around, there was a graphic designer, and she wanted to put a notice on her website. She was in the process of building up or creating her business, and she wanted to advertise on her website that she was going to make design websites, and she wanted to put a notice on her website that she was unwilling to create websites promoting same-sex marriages, and instead would refer gay patrons to other potential designers who may provide the services. And they attempted to make it clear that it wasn't that she was unwilling to make products for gay people, but she didn't want to make her work towards a gay marriage, which is what she felt. She called it a biblical truth, that a marriage is between one man and one woman. And that's what she was opposed to.
I don't know if I liked your tone.
Was it obvious?
It was dismissive and derisive.
It
We're
sure
dealing
was.
with facts here. We're dealing with facts. We're not throwing stones, as it were. Maybe you should read a parable about throwing stones, sir.
Yes, my tone was derisive. It's interesting that it came through. Anyway, that aside, so the case went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled in favor of her that she should not be obligated to make websites for specifically promoting gay weddings because of her religious aversion to said weddings. And this ruling has gotten a lot of publicity. There's been a lot of chatter about it. So, what are your thoughts on it?
Oh, I think it was the right decision. I think, um, free speech and freedom to do what you want it should be upheld by our government and is promised in the Constitution. So whether or not we agree with, that it's a biblical truth, or whether or not we agree that the person, whichever side we're on as far as, gay marriage or LGBTQ rights, whatever, people should be able to do it. I mean, and oftentimes I think it wise to think about it from other perspectives. For example, many times I think people get caught up in with the fact that this person, was calling it in your derisive tone, you said biblical truths, And you obviously would think that they should just make the cake, which is fine. But what if the shoe were on the other foot and it were somebody that said, um, somebody comes to the web designer or comes to the wedding baker and says, I want you to make a cake for me that says God doesn't love gay people.
Hmm.
And the person's like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to, I don't think, I don't feel comfortable with that. Now, some people might say like, whatever, it's your cake. I don't care. I don't agree with you, but other people might be like, I don't feel comfortable with that. I don't want, I want to be inclusive here. And they should have the right to do that as well. They have every right, no matter which side of um, we're talking about two separate things here. One is, gay marriage, whether we agree with that or disagree with that. And the other thing is free speech. And so, yeah, I think they made the right decision.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that I find very interesting about this is some of the arguments that were being laid out by the Supreme Court was that they were very specific. They were considering her case because she wasn't simply providing a merchant service. She wasn't just selling them a sandwich or providing catering for this wedding. They were very particular in that it was a creative outlet, creative product that she was making. She was and that's why they called it her free speech. So if she had been simply providing, serving food at this wedding, not making the food, but serving the food, then she would have been obligated to provide the service. But because it was creative, it then falls into that her freedom of expression category, and so therefore she didn't have to do it. And I get your point about being obligated to provide a service for anybody, but I feel like this one's a little bit different because of the protected class. And this is one that came about, first of all, because of affirmative action, and that there were certain people that were prone to prejudice, and that the government was trying to ensure that prejudice didn't come into play. And initially, the classes were basically race, then it became gender, and then sexual orientation. And so it does seem like in this case, the Supreme Court is saying, well, these protected classes, if it's a religious belief, you are now free to express your bias against those classes. There's no longer protected classes in the case of religion and freedom of expression.
Well, I think you're making some logical jumps there to say because you don't have to provide a service to them, they're no longer a protected class is a bit of an overstatement, in my opinion. I mean, and I would, I guess I haven't looked very closely at the case, but I would say they don't have to provide catering either. I don't know why you'd have to provide something. You can choose whoever you want to serve. You don't have to serve everybody. And I don't know. And I don't know what like. I guess I have a couple thoughts about that protected class. I mean, maybe it's still necessary, but most people don't really care about if you want to get married and you're gay. I don't think there's very few people in this country that care too much anymore. There are people that don't. But most people are like, yeah, do your thing. I don't even know why it's a part of why the government even gets involved. Like to me, government should not be involved in marriage at all. At the very least, or at the very most, I think they should offer equal rights to people. So for example, it seems like the rights that come from marriage are sometimes tax deductions and sometimes, the right to, it seems like hospitals, healthcare providers, and others, even funeral homes, they have certain rules that you need to prove that you're a family member. And unless you can show by some document that you're a family member, then you can't get into the hospital to see somebody that you care about. And I think that should be afforded to everybody, regardless of, their sexual orientation or whatever else. Like you should be able to choose the people that get that information that can visit you, and you should be able to get the tax deduction. I don't really care if the government, I don't know why the government's involved in marriage. Like, I think we should leave that to the churches or something else, but there should be some mechanism that people can get the same rights, I guess you'll call it, because if tax deductions are a right, or, the ability to get information, healthcare information, like there should be some other mechanism besides showing a marriage certificate or saying you're married or something. But yeah, in general, I would say people should be able to do whatever they want. And if you don't feel like providing a service to somebody, then don't provide it to them, whether they're rude or whether they're, I just don't have a problem with it. Now, if you and I saw that somebody was discriminating according to race, even though it was legally allowed, I think you and I hopefully would be standing up for those people to make sure that they were treated equally. Same with these other issues. But I wouldn't press too hard. Like, if the baker doesn't want to make a cake because he doesn't agree with your lifestyle, fine. I don't have a problem with that. If people want to do that against Christians, I don't have a problem with that. I think that would be fine. I think we're getting too worried about, hey, the government needs to step in and make sure everybody's behaving. And this protected class type of a thing, I think for the most part, I think, there's a whole month that we got Pride Month. I think everybody's pretty much fine with it. As long as people don't like differences, I guess. And so if people are, I don't know what the right word is. If they're more in your face about it, that's going to cause some problems. Like at work, you'd prefer to have people not bringing politics or, these ideological issues to work. Like it should just be the workplace and not something else. On the other hand, if you're the owner of a business and you don't want to provide services, I think that should be fine. I hope I'm clear. I kind of was a bit rambling on that one.
Yeah, no, I get it. But it's also worth remembering that gay marriage has only been legal in all 50 states for less than a decade. So to say that everybody is okay with it, well, even as early as a decade ago, there were a lot of people that weren't. A lot of states did not permit it. And if you recall, when they did require all 50 states to recognize gay marriage, there was a lot of pushback. And I think I do not believe that there are a lot of people. There are a lot of people, I believe, that still are resistant to gay marriage. In fact, we have one of them that was that's before the Supreme Court a little while ago.
I'd like to address that a little bit. There's a couple of things to say about that. One is, that's one of the reasons. I mean, first of all, I think the reason that so many people were concerned about that is the point that I was making earlier, that we're, for some reason, putting marriage into the government. We're giving government the right or the responsibility or both to manage marriages. And they shouldn't be involved in that. And if you took that away, I think a lot of people would have a lot less problem with it because they do think, I think at least you'd have fewer people that cared about this if you said, yeah, fine, it's not marriage, but we do need people that care about each other and that love each other to be able to find out about their significant other in the hospital. And fine, let's give them tax deductions. I think people would have less problem if we just said, okay, it's not marriage, but it's something.
Sure. I would agree. If they called it civil union, I think there's a number of people that would said, yeah, it's not a big deal anymore. It's the word marriage that there were certain people, because marriage is what they used in the Bible, that they were really holding on very tightly to. And yeah, for whatever reason.
But on top of that, like there's that portion of it that I think we kind of agree. But on top of that, you're talking about government regulating this for us. What's interesting is as recently as 2012, leaders of, and we can, if we can agree, I think that the Democratic Party is more progressive in these regards and more accepting of different lifestyles, it seems. Obama and the leaders of the Democratic Party in 2012, that was when they finally accepted gay marriage themselves. Like before then, even Obama was against it. Mm-hmm. So when we give the responsibility and the power to the federal government or any government to manage these things, I don't think that we're going to be doing a good job. So while right now everybody's like, oh, good, they're on my side, they're agreeing with what I'm saying. I guess not right now. Well, maybe people on the right are saying right now, hey, that's great because they're agreeing with me. And then people on the left, in 2012, good, they're agreeing with me. Like it's just so difficult to, if you want to cede that responsibility for all these things to the federal government, there's going to come a time where they're going to do it in a way that you don't like. That's why I would take it out of their hands. Like it was legal to have slaves a long time ago. It was legal. Jim Crow was legal. Let's get government, let's stop them from doing all this stuff and let us manage ourselves. Now, I know you're going to say, well, when we do a poor job of it, I think the only reason we do a poor job of it is because people can control can control the government. They can, they have political power and they get things passed that we don't like. And it's too easy for government to wrest control from us. So when you say, I want the government to make everybody do what I want to do, well, that's fine until you're in the minority, which you have been a lot in the past, and or until something happens that you disagree with. So yeah, I would stay away from that, and I think you should look at it from both sides because right now you're saying I don't like what the conservative court is doing, but it may come around that that's what happens. This is the result of what happens when you give them that responsibility.
It's an interesting subject and one that comes up frequently in our conversations. And I know one of your responses, in fact, it came up in our last conversation, was if you leave the government, if the government doesn't mandate these changes, the changes towards inclusivity do happen eventually. But it's the eventually part that is problematic, because if at the very end of our conversation last week, we were talking about sports and about some of the professional athletic organizations, and talked about how they integrated on their own, with Major League Baseball being the first one in 1947 and Jackie Robinson. But it then took a couple of decades for the other athletic organizations to follow suit. And the last one, I think, was the PGA, and the gentleman that was it, Lee Elder, who ended up at the Masters finally in 1975. So it took from 1947 to 1975 for all the major league, for all of the professional leagues to finally integrate to a degree. And Lee Elder was a little bit upset because he was at the end of his career by the time he finally got to the Masters. And if he had been given the opportunity to play there earlier, he would have probably been more successful in his professional golf career. And so, yes, it would happen eventually, but how many people are not given the opportunity because we allow things to happen at the slow pace by which society very grudgingly and gradually accepts those that are different than us?
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to look at it, Brian, but it just seems, how do you deal with the fact that the only way the government gets involved is when we have a majority? And meaning you're not going to get government to change until you're in the majority.
Sure.
Is that a fair statement? So, I guess what you're saying is, we'll just wait. I don't know. We're waiting for government for us to wrest control of enough of the government to enforce our will, which sometimes that is very necessary and everything. But if you look back at all of the big racial issues that we've had in our country, it all happened because government was involved, meaning people used the government to control other people. Slavery happened because the court systems, the laws, they were able to force all of those people into slavery because you couldn't call the police and be like, hey, look, this is happening. It was legal. Jim Crow, the same thing. Like they were starting to integrate, things were starting to happen, and then they went and got control of government and put these rules in place to where they had voting requirements that made it very difficult for Black people to be able to vote. President Eisenhower, or President Roosevelt put Japanese people in internment camps. Even a lot of the banking laws that came about in the 60s, 70s, the red lines, that was from government. All of these things happened because of government. It's just very difficult to do without the government behind you. Government seems to be the problem. You think it's the cure, but it's curing the problem that government created. Now, I understand it's people who go in and create it through government, but that's how they get their power. That's why I think we should take them out of the equation.
I mean, I see your point, but at the same time, the government can create problems. Government can also solve problems. And I guess my confusion here with what you're saying is that you can't be arguing that slavery wouldn't happen if the government didn't allow it to happen.
Yeah, I mean, we had a country, Brian, and if well, we'll try to do it now. Could you have slaves now?
Well, there's laws against it.
Right. So government, you have to have in our society, you have to have a government that allows it. Government is the one that allows it.
Yeah, but if government had it made no statements about whether slavery was legal or illegal, if there was, let's say it's 1787 that we've gotten rid of the British, we've gotten out from under their yoke, we now have this freedom, and they said, okay, we're not going to make any laws whatsoever, we're not going to impose slavery, we're not going to require slavery, we're not going to anything about slavery. You can now do your own thing. Are you saying that there would have been no slavery?
No. I'm saying you should have that. I'm fine with laws against slavery. I think that's fine. Like what the government should be doing is the bare minimum to ensure, as we've said before, the government ensures our right to life, liberty, and liberty is one of them. So there should be laws that ensure our liberty, our freedom, and our pursuit of happiness. So then where we always get caught up, you and I, is what is the pursuit of happiness? And you're saying, unless that particular cake maker makes me a cake, I don't have the right to my pursuit of happiness. Like those are the three things that the government is supposed to provide for us. Isn't that true? Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness.
Well, that's so the Declaration of Independence, right?
Yeah, I mean, but that was the Constitution was put in place to ensure that we had those rights. So I think it follows. Yeah, the Declaration of Independence says life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness.
Okay.
We set this Constitution up to ensure, and a government up so that we could get life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Well, the cake making doesn't have anything to do with life or liberty. No. I mean, I guess it does have something to do with liberty, but only the liberty of the person. I guess it's liberty of the person to either not make the cake and the person to get a cake, but he can get it from some other way. So life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And we're saying, well, how important is it to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness that this particular guy makes my particular cake the way that I want it made, or my website the way that I want it made? He has to do it, otherwise my rights are impinged upon. Well, which rights? Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But that's the problem I have with this. Yes, you can make the case for slavery, and that should definitely be a law. You cannot put me into slavery. You can't hold a gun to my head, put me in chains, whip me when I don't work for you. That is impinging on my right to liberty and pursuit of happiness. But that is clear. But where we get into this problem is, all I'm saying is all of these problems come from government. Not that we should do away with government or have no laws. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying like a lot of these problems are coming from government. And when you're in the majority, it feels great because you're like, good, we're all doing what we want. The government's doing what I want. And I would say that's a dangerous place to be because you have been in the minority a lot. If you went back through history, if who you are right now saying that, hey, listen, gay people should be able to get married. I say the same thing. I'm fine with it. If we went back 50 years, would we be in the minority or the majority? Let's just take that out of the government's hands because at some point we might again find ourselves in the minority. And what we should do is focus on a very small government where they just ensure those three things. And if it doesn't have to do with those three things, and pursuit of happiness can be a big gray area. So we need to be very careful about it. But when I look at this one, I'm like, geez, do I really need that guy to make me a website, especially in this day and age? No, I don't think that's necessary for your life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And I think it can be a real problem when the government steps in and starts telling us what we need to do. Oh, I think you're being discriminatory, so we're going to punish you for it. I mean, you know how it can be when the government comes in and starts regulating you. It becomes difficult. You and I have talked about problems that both of us have had in the past where they overstep their bounds. That's what they do. They overstep their bounds. So let's just keep them out of this. There's plenty of websites out there. There's plenty of cake designers. Just do your own thing. Everybody be happy. You look out your window. You look out your window. Leave each other alone. If you want to make a cake, then make it. If you don't want to pay for the cake, then don't ask them to make it. Like whatever, you know what I mean? Just stay away from each other.
I think that this right here would be an interesting conversation in and of itself because you're right. Life and liberty, pretty clear, pretty cut and dry. There's no dispute about what life and liberty are. Pursuit of happiness is where that's very gray and very fuzzy, and that's where people start to step on each other's toes. But in fact, I think it would be. I wouldn't mind having a conversation just on that. But if we can go back to this website designer just for a little bit, I feel like the reason why this is such an issue, and this reason why this went up to the Supreme Court, was that, as I said, when we were talking about what it was that got that the impetus for the lawsuit was that she wanted to post the notice that she wouldn't design a website for gay marriage. She wanted that to be out there and out in the open. And I feel like there's many easier ways to handle that same situation that are not basically standing up, in your front yard with a big sign saying, "This is what I think. Everyone pay attention to what I think."
Like Black Lives Matter signs,
yeah,
that type of thing.
sort of, yeah, yeah.
So you're against those people that have the Black Lives Matters, and
I'm not against them. I mean, if that's where you want to stand, if that's where you feel you want to identify with, then fine, go ahead and do that. I find it very interesting. No, I'm not going to get sidetracked. I'm going to go back to what I was saying. What I was saying was that, for example, in my business, when going in and giving people renovations and repairs in their homes, if I find a place I don't want to do work, we have what we call the inconvenience tax. It's not listed on the invoice anyplace. This is what we add to say, I don't want to do this job, but if you pay this amount to it, I'll go ahead and do it. And depending how much we don't want to do the job, we'll add more to that inconvenience tax. If the job is really far away, I don't want to drive. If it's a small job and I know I could get a bigger job, I could get a job that pays me more money. I don't like the people, the house smells, whatever it is. If I don't want to do the job, I add to that inconvenience tax, and whatever it is, my lack of desire to do the job will increase that tax. And that's what she could have done. She didn't have to put the label on her website. She could have just waited for someone to come to her and say, I want you to design me a website for me and my hubby's gay marriage. And she could have said, okay, fine. But when she goes to invoice them, she could have charged them triple or whatever it was that she was fairly certain they wouldn't pay. And that would have avoided the whole confrontational, I want to go and be seen as making this stand. But she didn't want to do that. She wanted to make the stand.
Okay, I have I got two problems with that. One, that puts you as a business owner in a very dangerous situation, because then you're seen as charging discriminatory prices against a protected class.
Only if it's public. Only if I say I'm charging, here's what I'm charging somebody else. Oh, and by the way, the sheet that you're seeing is going to be a different price.
How easy would that be to do? All you'd have to do is to A, look at their website and see what their price listings are. B, get a hold of somebody else's invoice and see, oh my gosh, they're charging triple to me. Why are they charging triple to me? Then everybody else they're charging. And then, get another friend that's gay and have them go over there. And then all of a sudden you've got all these, 2 or 3 gay invoices that are triple the cost, and then given to the government, and they're discriminating against me. That's crazy that you would think.
That's quite an orchestration.
That is a very dangerous place to be. Huh?
It's quite an orchestration of events that you've got going on there, that you're going to go and that maybe you should get someone to pretend to be straight to go and ask for the same website so you can go and compare and contrast. I mean, yeah, you could do it. Most people won't, because once they get a price they don't like, most people are getting 3 estimates and then they choose the estimate they like and they move on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this stuff happens, and the government, this is the type of thing that the government enforces. Like, they go to banks and try to find, and I know they're not going to cake designers, but if you somehow caught wind of it, and people catch wind of this stuff, like, oh, don't go to that guy. He's, if you're talking amongst friends, we went to him when we were talking about making a cake and it was so expensive. Oh, really? He was pretty reasonable. How much was it? Oh, it was 3 times as much. Why did he charge us $900 and he charged you $300? Huh. And then talk with a few more people, start looking. Yeah, people get worried about that stuff and they look into it. But that aside, let's say, yeah, you can be dismissive and derisive about it if you want, but that type of stuff happens and people are worried about it. And, I don't know what this has to do with the case, because what you're saying is, the question is whether it's allowable or not, whether it's legal or not. So saying that there are other ways to handle it has nothing to do with the fact that if they want to do it this way, either they can or they can't. And the Supreme Court said they couldn't. And it sounds like what you're saying is they shouldn't have said that. The Supreme Court should have said, you have to make a cake for him. You have to make a website for them. And they don't want to do that. And it's easier than getting these bids from people and then having to tell them after the fact, like, well, I'm just going to charge you more money because I don't like what you're saying. Or maybe you get pretty far down the process, and then they start, you realize that, that they want to change, or that you start to look more closely at their requirements and you realize what it is. Like, there's all kinds of reasons why I think that would be a risky way to go. But the real question is whether it's allowed and legal or not.
Well,
And my contention would be you should be able to do what you want. You can go to whichever cake designer you want. And if everybody looks at that cake designer and says, "Oh, that person's a bigot. I don't want to get," that may hurt their business. Fine. If it does, then they've made their choice. They're advertising something. They're putting their ideology into their business, and that's their prerogative. And if they want to lose money, I mean, maybe some places they lose money, maybe some places they would gain it. But if they want to do that, that's up to them. Maybe it's virtue signaling. I don't know, but they should be able to do what they want.
I feel like in a perfect world, there would be lots of people to choose from. There would be lots of opportunity out there, but there's plenty of examples where we haven't lived in a perfect world. Do you remember as a kid we watched mom had recorded the TV series Roots? Do you remember watching that as a kid?
No, I read the book, but when I was older, but I don't remember that as a kid. No.
Well, she was there's a scene. I'm sure it's in the book as well. But there's a scene where the young army officer and his wife and his child are trying to find a hotel, and they're black, and they're exhausted. They keep on going hotel to hotel to hotel, and every time they go in, the guy goes in uniform. I'm looking for a room for my wife and my kids. We just want a room for the night. We're quiet. We're peaceful. Constantly hearing no vacancy. Oh, but it says outside there's a vacancy. Nope, I forgot to change the sign. No vacancy. One of the scenes he goes in, same thing. He leaves as he's walking in. As he's walking out, a white man is walking in, and he's sitting in the car explaining to his wife, "We couldn't get the hotel again. I know it's I'm sure it's racist. I don't know. We just got to keep going. We can't make a fuss." As they're talking, the white man walks out holding the hotel room key, showing his whoever's in the car, "We got it. We're ready. We're good to go." So clearly, that black man and his wife and his child were not given a room because of their race, even though he was in the army and all the other reasons. And so the reason why there are protected classes, and I don't know that I don't know it applies necessarily to wedding cake designers or web designers if you live in an area where there's more than one, or you can find more than one. But that's why we had protected classes. Now, web designers, you can get them online. You don't need to be local. So I don't know that it really applies to the situation, but they didn't address the issue of availability in the Supreme Court. And I feel like that's an important issue. If you live in a small town, there may only be one cake designer. And I feel like you should have access to a wedding cake. As long as there's more than one, I don't know that it necessarily requires everyone to, service all classes and all groups.
You bring this up, so you brought this up a number of times. It's just such an interesting argument. I mean, well, it seems like a useless argument that you make. Like, you've made it at times that, it's really important that people across the country in rural small towns have postal delivery. It's really important that they have internet, and the rest of us should pay for it no matter how expensive it is. I mean, if you move to a small town and they don't have it, move someplace else or don't
Just
use
move.
it. Like,
it's that easy. You just get up and move.
yeah, like if I went to some towns in Montana, there would be no internet.
Yeah.
If I went to rural Montana, and should I then lobby my congressman like, I can't believe this. I moved out in the middle of nowhere and there's no internet. You need to get it out here for me. Raise taxes so I can have internet. That is a ridiculous argument.
You went there. You went to this place that didn't have internet. What happens if you grew up there? What happens if that's where you were living? I mean, you're laughing like this, like that. Who would just stay in one place? There are lots of people that live in the middle of nowhere and don't have access to not only internet, they don't have access to the type of job that they could get anywhere. There are people that live paycheck to paycheck. I'm not sure if you're aware of this.
I agree.
If their car breaks down,
I agree. Well, they don't have access to Walmart. Should we get them a Walmart? They don't have access. Yeah, if they don't have access, maybe they don't have a car. Should we give
Not a
them a car?
Walmart, a grocery store. Do they have a grocery store? It doesn't matter what the
No, but
brand.
the grocery stores are typically way more expensive than Walmart. So they don't have
But
access
they
to
have
cheap
food.
groceries.
They have food.
No, but it's not cheap, Brian. Why is it that they can have food, but you get cheaper food? Why do you get cheaper food? Just because they happen to be born somewhere? Like you could take this argument ad absurdum to great lengths. It's an like yeah, they're not gonna have stuff. You go up in the Appalachian Mountains in the middle of nowhere, you might not have good TV. You might not be able to get CNN or Fox News or the internet or whatever. Like I
But
don't
they have
know.
food,
That's just,
they have gas, they have clothing. I'm not sure these
but
are
they don't
not
have it. But you were making the argument about internet and other and good jobs and car repairs or whatever else. Like if people live somewhere, they have what's available, and eventually things will improve. But it's not the responsibility of government to ensure that every person in every part of the country has the exact same internet and they have availability of different things. Like you're just picking and choosing what you think is important that they have access to. Like you can go to some small towns and they don't have any cake designers. Why'd you allow that? Like you're saying, if you go to some town and the only cake designer is a Christian that doesn't want to do gay weddings, that's unacceptable. But if you go to the next, 3 towns over, 100 miles away, and there's no cake designers, oh, that's fine because there's no cake designers. Don't you see that doesn't that's an illogical argument that
no,
it's not okay if there's one cake designer and it's the only one, but he won't provide a service to you. But if there are no cake designers, that's okay because there aren't any.
because it's all
I
or
don't.
nothing.
That argument doesn't follow to me.
Everyone has access to the cake designer, or nobody has access to the cake designer. It's not like I'm choosing. You can have access to a cake designer, but I'm not making you a cake. You don't get a cake.
But your argument is inconsistent, Brian. You said if they're in an area where they don't have access to this stuff because the only cake designer in town won't give it to them, that's unacceptable. But 3 towns over, 100 miles away, there's no cake designers. Well, that's fine because nobody's being discriminatory. So your real problem is with the discrimination, not the fact that they might not have access to a cake designer.
Well, if they have a town with more than one cake designer, then discrimination isn't an issue. That's the point. There's accessibility. We're running low on time, so keep an eye on that clock up there.
Yeah, but you keep changing. Like the argument you made was if there's one town, because you said the Supreme Court should have looked at accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, if you're in, and the example you gave was like, if there's only one cake designer in town and he won't provide services for homosexual weddings, that's unacceptable. And I said, well, what about those other towns in the Appalachian Mountains or in the, rural Montana where there's no cake designers? Do we need to provide cake
Well, in that
services
case,
to all
there's
of
no
them?
discrimination
Open up,
happening.
Federally run cake stores in all these places so they can all get it? No, you're not saying that. You're only saying, so really, you don't care about the accessibility. You care about the discrimination. So you're clouding the issue with this accessibility point, but it's got nothing to do with it. You only care about discrimination.
Look, discrimination is always wrong, but discrimination could be permissible if there is more availability outside of that one, the small group of individuals that will discriminate. But that's all depends if it's available.
Your argument is inconsistent.
Well, I mean, availability always is inconsistent. It's kind of the nature of availability.
How can you make the point that if you're in a town with only one cake designer who won't provide services to you because and let's say he's being discriminatory, that's not okay, but the next town over has no cake designers and that's okay? Why is one okay and one not? And they're both dealing with accessibility.
Because we're not, Colin, are you watching the clock up there? We're running out of time here. I mean, we can keep going with this, but at some point it's going to cut us off. Why?
Well, you haven't answered the question, but
I have, but you haven't been happy with the answer. I have given you the answer. It's discriminatory behavior is never acceptable, but it's permissible, in my opinion, if there are other options. If there are no other options, if you are a pharmacist and you don't want to be giving out the morning after pill, as long as there are other pharmacies that are as available, then fine, go to one of the other pharmacies. But if you are the only pharmacist in town, then you must give out the pills, even if you don't like the. We hope you learned something in this episode of Brother versus Brother, a podcast about difficult conversations. We also hope that you enjoyed it enough to subscribe to the podcast. You can help us by spreading the word. Share this episode on your favorite social media so that others will have an opportunity to experience it as well. You can also support us by donating through Patreon. This information and more can be found on our website, broconvo.com, and on our various social media accounts. Thank you.